Hello, boys and girls, ladies and gents. This is Defub21, and I have just watched Star Trek Picard, Season 3, Episode 9, once, and watched it partially to completion again. And now I am in a position to tell you what I think. First and foremost, compared to, again, The Mandalorian, this is a shorter episode by this season of Star Trek Picard standards. It's about 40... what is it again? It's about 47 minutes long in total, which makes it shorter than the average Star Trek Picard episode, but probably longer than the average Mandalorian episode. It is, again, much better written than an awful lot of Mandalorian episodes are, certainly have been this season. And there's no feeling of kind of compressed storytelling, because again, this season of Star Trek Picard is much more serialized storytelling than The Mandalorian does, and it's much better done. If that is the key dividing line between the two shows, this season of Star Trek Picard is much better written than The Mandalorian is. The Mandalorian season 3 feels very kind of it's very all over the place. The story threads, that should be running from the very first episode of this season, The Mandalorian, right up to the to where we are in the show, that show right now, aren't. They're done in a very kind of a very what's the word for it? Entire story threads appear out of nowhere in one episode and are now the big thing by the end of a single episode. The whole Coruscant stuff on is it episode 3 or 4 of The Mandalorian is the prime example of this, where this just comes out of nowhere and suddenly it's a big thing by the end of the episode. Well, if the people writing Star Trek Picard had written The Mandalorian, it would be much better put together. The storytelling would be much more seamless. Story threads that would have taken the entire season to be worked through are instead in The Mandalorian being done in one episode or two, which results in a lot of, as I said in my review of the previous episode, The Mandalorian, results in an awful lot of corner cutting in terms of the storytelling, how things are written down on the page, and how as a result you see them on the screen. And Star Trek Picard, maybe it does have a couple of kind of holdover legacy bad behaviors from kind of the writing / storytelling of kind of 1980s, 1990s, 2000s episodic television, but nowhere near as bad as The Mandalorian. And this episode, is a prime example of this. It's much better written than certainly pretty much all I've seen so far of The Mandalorian. It's a shorter episode by Star Trek Picard standards, but a longer episode by Mandalorian standards. It feels fast-paced. It doesn't drag, it doesn't get boring at all. It holds my attention surprisingly well, considering how, one could say, bad my attention is. And it's well acted from beginning to end. And I would say, in terms of the acting, when it comes to The Mandalorian as well, it's not as well acted, but that to a not insignificant degree is not down to the actors, but down to the material they've been given to act on, as it were. And so across the board, with one episode left to go of Star Trek Picard, and I think 1 or 2 episodes left to go of The Mandalorian, 2 episodes left of The Mandalorian to go, Star Trek Picard is certainly well on its way to being by far the better show this season, just because of the writing, irrespective of anything else. Now, in terms of the episode itself, again, spoiler warnings, or spoiler warning, or warning of spoilers, it turning out that the main kind of bad guy behind the scenes is the quote-unquote Borg, for me, is not particularly surprising. They've always been the kind of the great Satan of the Star Trek universe, although again a lot of damage was done to them as far as I'm concerned in Star Trek Voyager. They were a much less threatening adversary by the end of that show than they were at the beginning, which I think was bad for them. But I would say, as a point of reference, I consider the 2 episodes where the Borg turned up and abducted Picard in Next Gen to be two of the best episodes of science fiction television ever made. Those are two great high stakes episodes. Apart from that, it wasn't particularly surprising. I'm not sure of the Borg because, again, a Voyager, for certainly those hardcore Star Trek fans who've watched all the shows, and again, I think they were in season 2 of Picard as well, but again, I didn't watch that, so I didn't watch that, so if it did any more damage to the Borg brand, I'm not aware of it. But certainly Voyager did quite a bit of damage to the Borg brand, and they simply weren't as kind of a threatening an adversary at the beginning of Star Trek Voyager as they were by the end of it, which I think was one of a number of mistakes, a variety of mistakes that were made with Star Trek Voyager that hurt the show. And it's the reason why of Next Gen, DS9 and Voyager, it's by far, in my opinion, the weakest of those three shows. And it signals to my mind what has been the beginning of the decline of Star Trek, certainly television shows. In the case of Star Trek Picard, we'll see how it pans out in the next episode, but the way they've kind of strung everything together here is, credit where credit is due, is clever. It basically turns out that Picard doesn't have aromatic syndrome, which killed his original biological body, but instead was genetically modified by the Borg when they assimilated him as Locutus. And they did some extra genetic modification to him over what they do to the standard Borg drone to make them their body/organs compatible with Borg implants. Their bodies don't reject them. And apparently they did something extra to Picard/Locutus, which he has passed on in even more enhanced form to his only biological child, his son. Is it Jack? Yes, it's Jack. I can't remember the guy. Again, I apologize for forgetting the new characters' names, but again, this character's new this season, and the rest of them, again, I've been paying so little attention to Star Trek for the last couple of years because how poor it was that I've kind of forgot things I should remember. Outside of what's happened to Jack and his predicament, the way that they've basically gone from come up with a way of assimilating Starfleet and the Federation, not through mechanical means by using nanoprobes, in other words microscopic robots, but instead through effectively genetic modification via using the transporter systems. Surprise, surprise, surprise. Which actually, again, the writing here is much better than Mandalorian. This is a very kind of clever idea, credit where credit is due, that apparently to simplify transporting people from one location to another, they keep genetic databases of all the most commonly found DNA of every known species in their transporter systems, which I would think would be a bit dangerous, but obviously if they're only using it, say, as a redundant backup or something under normal circumstances, that would be all right. But here, the Borg, enabled by the changelings, have successfully tainted all the transporters in Starfleet to genetically modify everyone's base genetic code, but it turns out that it only really works on those who've been put through a transporter who've been tainted when they're below a certain age before they've reached physical maturity, which among humans at the very least is around 25 years of age, according to this show. I don't know whether that's true or not, but so I can't agree or disagree with that position. It's scientifically true or not, so I can't say whether that's true or not. But it's a clever idea. It means the younger crew members, all the ensigns and so on, including both of Geordi's daughters, turn on the crew of the rest of the crew of the Titan. They turn on their crews on all the Starfleet ships, which for some strange reason have been brought to Earth for, what is it called again? Something Day, Starfleet Day, whatever they're calling it, Armada Day, whatever. Which to my mind sounds extremely, considering how large the Federation is in terms of how much raw space it takes up, sounds like, to my mind, quite a bad idea. I mean, all it would take is an emergency with a Federation member planet that's some distance away, and suddenly Starfleet isn't able to help in that scenario. So again, if there is a bit of, silly ideas in the writing, this is one of them. But the idea of switching from assimilation via, again, microscopic robots, to assimilation via genetic modification is in fact, credit where credit is due, quite clever. Although it appears that from the outside, I mean, I don't know if the Borg are controlling these assimilated young people purely through Jack Crusher. But if they are, then if he just stayed away from them, this wouldn't have happened, and an awful lot of people who have ended up dead and will end up dead they'll it's all on him, and I'm sure he'll face no consequences, assuming he survives, for killing hundreds, maybe even thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of people who were on those ships and also on space stations who've not been assimilated. The other key kind of storytelling question, which I will have, I don't know if we'll be seeing in the next episode at all, is the issue with the changelings. Specifically, they're not in this episode at all. Are they now disappeared from the story now that the Borg have shown their hand and we're never going to see or hear from them again, which, considering the fact they spent most of this season being the antagonists, I think would be a case of bad storytelling, in my view. Maybe they'll turn up, maybe they won't, but if they're just gone from now here on out, again, that would be, to my mind, an example of bad storytelling. But again, compared to The Mandalorian, it's just so much better done. There's it's hardly worth complaining about it, considering the standard being set by The Mandalorian. Outside of this, one of my own personal kind of bugaboos, the things I really, I've already reiterated it in this series of reviews already several times, is I do not like member berries. Fan service for me is a good new Star Wars show or movie, or a good new Star Trek movie or TV show, and constantly throwing kind of fan favorites at you to play to the kind of the hardcore fan base crowd, I don't like it. One of the things that I actively disliked and kind of ruined the experience for me in Rogue One, which is the best of the Disney Star Wars movies, is the fact that they took video footage or recordings of the actors who played fighter pilots from the original, from Episode 4, A New Hope, the first Star Wars movie of the attack on the Death Star, of the various rebel pilots, and they put them in place in that movie during the big Battle of Scarif at the end of Rogue One, and that fan service just took me completely out of it. It damaged my suspension of disbelief, and it kind of negatively hurt my my kind of enjoyment of that movie. Although it's still the best of the new Star Wars films. I haven't seen the Lando movie or the Han Solo movie. I haven't seen that. And I haven't seen the Rise of Skywalker either. So it's just purely the first two sequel trilogy movies and Rogue One. And Rogue One is certainly better than the two sequel trilogy films I have seen. In terms of member berries here, the obvious one, again, spoiler warning, is that once the Titan is taken by the Borg and Captain Shaw is seemingly killed, they retreat to Geordi's command, in other words, the space station / museum that for some strange reason one of the best engineers in Starfleet was put in charge of. I would think they would have put him in charge of a shipyard designing or building, high-end Federation Starfleet starships. But again, that's, maybe that's his own personal lifestyle choice that is yet to be explained to me. But they retreat back to his space museum, where, surprise, 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 he's been rebuilding the Enterprise D. Now, the excuse for doing this as to why the original saucer section was retrieved is actually quite, again, straightforward but also clever one, which is that the planet it crashed onto was populated by a primitive species, and therefore the Prime Directive applies, and so they need to get the saucer section off the planet to avoid contaminating the indigenous species, culture, and society. I would have thought they would just chopped it up into bits and taken it up that way, because the saucer section is on the Galaxy class starships is huge, but they didn't do that. And I wasn't taken by surprise. There were references to a particular dock inside the space station when they first turn up at that space station, at that space museum, and Geordi kind of shushes his daughter when she mentions it, which says to me that there was something we were going to find out about later on. And considering that the space station is a space museum that contains an awful lot of kind of quote unquote fan favorite starships, the fact that something like this, I didn't think they would go as far as resurrecting the Enterprise D, but they did do that. Now, one thing I have a particular issue with is the explanation as to Geordi's been scavenging the parts necessary to rebuild the Enterprise D for a very, very long time. But we know for a fact that the Galaxy-class starship, or at least my understanding is that the Galaxy-class starship remained in production, probably at quite an accelerated rate, throughout the Dominion War, and probably for a period of time afterwards. So it is quite probable there were more than enough spare parts and components out there, not just out there in stockpiles, but being manufactured to maintain existing Galaxy class starships that would have remained in service. There should be. I mean, this is the whole thing issue again I have with the whole all of Starfleet being at Earth for whatever was Fleet Day or whatever they were calling it. Is there should be large numbers of kind of next generation DS9 pre-Dominion War and Dominion War era starships, Galaxy class vessels and so on, Defiant class starships as well, and other vessels that would have been built in particularly large numbers during the war, the Dominion War, and then built in large numbers immediately after it to replace Starfleet's losses. That should still be in circulation decades later. The Galaxy class is one example. The Voyager class starship should also be in service in significant numbers. The Defiant class, which one would have imagined would have joined the Dominion War and since would have become a major workhorse heavy hitter that could be produced in large numbers because of its small size for Starfleet. Those ships are absent from this kind of fleet event. And I'll get to this also as a side note. They take the Enterprise, this rebuilt Enterprise, all very well and good, but there's at least two other candidates that they could also have taken with them to maximize their chances if they're operating skeleton crews on both. We know the USS Voyager is at this space dock. We know its class was in production for, again, would have been in production for quite some time after Voyager returned back to the Alpha Quadrant. I would not see why the ship would not be in full working order. That would also be true of the Defiant. Both ships, there would have been plenty of parts and components available to keep them both up and running. And since they have a skeleton crew on one ship, why the writers didn't say, right, we've got Seven of Nine, we've got Worf, we can have Worf and say take Raffi and someone else to go take command of the Defiant, and have Seven of Nine and a couple other people go and take Voyager, and then you've got three ships rather than one. And again, the Defiant may be a small ship, but it was literally built to fight the Borg, and was and is, for a ship its size, probably the most heavily armed and heavily shielded and armored vessel of its size the Federation ever built. And it was also the first purpose-designed, purpose-built warship that Starfleet had come up with for a very long time by the time it makes its appearance in DS9. And so it's you've gotten you've rebuilt the Enterprise D. It's basically a Frankenship built using parts and components scavenged from multiple different vessels. But you've got what looks to be a fully intact Voyager and a completely restored and repaired Defiant, because the Defiant in the last Star Trek Next Gen movie got beat up quite a bit. They're both there. Why wouldn't you take them with you? I mean, yeah, you've only got the bridge crew plus Raffi, but it's the Enterprise D operated with a crew of like 1,000 people. If you're going to be running them with that ship with a skeleton crew, you could probably only run it with, again, 3 or 4 people, which would be enough to get you 3 or 4 people onto Voyager and 3 or 4 people onto the Enterprise or onto the Defiant, or 2 or 3 people onto the Defiant and onto Voyager, and you've got 2 more ships. Why they wouldn't do that, again, I don't know. Maybe those 2 ships will turn up next episode. Maybe some people have similar ideas and they turn up at the space museum looking for ships they can scavenge. Who knows? But I don't think that's likely to happen. It could happen, but particularly if they wanted to have cameos from cast members from DS9 and Voyager. But outside of that, it's kind of, it's very member berry. They could have grabbed Voyager instead. They could have grabbed the Defiant or both of those ships. But bringing back the Enterprise D, which was, again, with the exception of the saucer section, completely obliterated in the first Star Trek Next Gen movie, whose name again I have forgotten. It's just a bit, it's a. Again, for me, this is someone who didn't like those member berries in the Battle of Scarif. For someone who wrote, I actually didn't like, Luke Skywalker turning up in the end of season 2 of The Mandalorian. And to be honest with you, that sequence is probably what saved that season of the show for much of the kind of the Star Wars fan base that were still watching, or at least helped plus that season to the absolute maximum. But as it stands, it's still, to be clear, better than anything we've seen so far out of The Mandalorian. Maybe, the 2 longer episodes of The Mandalorian compare okay to this episode. But the overall standard of The Mandalorian compared to this has been very, very poor. And again, it's all down to the writing. Serialized storytelling over story threads running through the entire course of the season, allowing you to build them and improve upon them over time. And the people who are writing The Mandalorian clearly don't know how to do that, or didn't have the time to do it, one or the other. And boy, oh boy, oh boy, does it show. I know there has been people going, oh, we want Captain Shaw to have his own show. Well, he's either dead now or he's injured to the point of incapacitation, one or the other. I suppose that this episode and the rest of the season, clearly of Star Trek Picard compared to The Mandalorian, really shows how important the storytelling is, and what an edge a show with serialized storytelling has over a show that's dominated by a combination of highly episodic storytelling and very short episodes in many cases. Anyway, I'm sure I've left an awful lot out. We didn't get to see the Borg Queen's face this episode, which says to me, is it a different actress, or are they just using a prop with the actress doing voice recordings? Why that is, I don't know. Maybe we'll never find out. But if the actress for one reason or another wasn't available to shoot those scenes, okay, we'll find out next episode. The actress, again, whose name I forget, who originally played the Borg Queen, she was very, very good at it. Credit where credit is due, and I hope we see her in the next episode. She did a very good job. I hope, again, the changelings haven't just disappeared, which they could have, in the next episode. And although they really have gotten into bed with someone they shouldn't trust, they should never trust the Borg. But I suppose, again, that is my review of this episode. It benefits from much better quality storytelling, and over the course of the season, much more serialized storytelling than The Mandalorian. Production quality isn't necessarily as good. There's been nothing like the kind of external environments we've seen compared to Star Trek Picard, but I imagine that's a combination of budgetary limitations, the cost of the cast and so on, and the cost of the cast, and just how much time they had to put things together and how much money they've got. But outside of that one, and the again, actually there is a side note. The side note is that my view that the Titan sets are too dark has been absolutely vindicated by, again, the giant member area of Enterprise D. The Enterprise D's bridge is, again, it's very beige. I fully admit that, but it looks much better than the Titan's bridge does because it's just so much brighter. If you made it that level of brightness, maybe a little bit darker in terms of the lighting, and darken the tone of kind of the actual physical set itself, the paint on the walls, as it were, a bit, made it slightly less beige, but not necessarily grayer, but kept the more bright kind of environment. I think that would have helped with the aesthetics quite substantially. As it is, it's Well, I've already said what I need to say. I just want to be repeating myself at this point. As it stands, there's one episode left of Star Trek Picard. I expect this to be a longer than average episode. It could be an hour plus long. It might only be 50 plus minutes so they can get all they need to get into it. But how they wrangle themselves out of this situation, I don't know. But I assume they will. But they will need, I think they're going to need more than 60 minutes to do it properly, again, in terms of the storytelling. And I fully expect that this is what we will get from the people running this show compared to Mandalorian, where Disney won't spend the money and the writers don't know how to execute properly or didn't have the time to execute properly. And boy, oh boy, does it show. Anyway, this is Defub21. If you like this review, please like it. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, please do so. And please tick the bell to get instant notifications of when I've uploaded new content. This is Defub21 signing off. Toodaloo.